Hey y'all. So today we are going to get into some environment design. It's more or less a two-part series where part one is going to be the creation and the ideation around what this environment could look like for our interactive scene. All of that I'm going to do inside of Photoshop. So we're going to do some basic 2D environment sketching, talk about some do's and don'ts. And then part two that we're going to get into in the next video, we'll be taking all of this over into Unity 6 and use ProBuilder or something comparable to white box in this environment and start seeing how we go from an idea in our head to pen and paper to interactive environment. So without further ado, let's dive in and we'll jump right into Photoshop. So what I'd like to do, I think, is take a memory of mine from playing Hogwarts Legacy, where we're kind of walking around a mountainside and come into an opening, see some sort of old rickety bridge that shows us a piece of castle out in the center, something like that. So you're kind of coming around this clearing. You see in the distance where you need to get to, and then you see basically the objective out there in the middle of the island or the clearing or what have you. So I'm just going to dive in, and I want to show that this does not need to be a time intensive exercise. So I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm using all standard brushes. I usually use a brush pack, but don't want to fool anyone into thinking that you need that to succeed. So I'm going into the lasso tool, and I'm going to have a couple of shapes that frame what I'm looking at. So I want to go to my darkest darks here because I'm closest to the camera. Typically, just as you get farther and farther from the camera, your contrast goes down and down, which is fine. And I may also just grab the lasso tool and come in here and do something similar. Perfect. So if I want, I could even go in and add a few highlights at this stage. So let's say I grab the lasso, come in this way, something like that, and then grab something like this, and maybe a little bit of that, and paint on something that's a bit more of like where the light's going to be hitting on each of these rocks. And let's say I don't like how that plays, so I'm going to take that out. It's perfectly fine. So that starts to get a little bit interesting, and maybe I'd do the same over here. Typically, I would wait until I get to later on to paint in some of the lighting and whatnot, but for right now, this is kind of interesting, so why not? All right, so now I can paint in with something that matches about what I have over here. And for now, I'm pretty happy with that. I feel like this piece is definitely going to need some adjustment, so I'm just going to do some hard edges there. And I'm fine with that for now. Cool. So those are some rocks that are off to the side that I'm seeing as I first walk out. Now I want to add in my next layer. I'm going to drag this under so it shows up behind. And then using my lasso again, going to create, after I move this over from my wild wiggling of my pen earlier, I'm going to add in the brush, or rather the lasso tool. And with the lasso, going to create kind of a movement outwards. And then I'm going to come in here and just make sure that it's all contained and add in that last little bit. So from here, I just want to move up to something that is a bit differentiating from everything around it. Increase the size and come over this way. It feels too dark to me, so I'm just going to lighten it up and may even give it a few highlights as if the sun's coming in to hit. And let's say I expect some rocks here, so maybe I'll do a shadow here and here. All right, so now that I have some shadows, I'll add in a new layer. And let's say we want to do something just super quick. I want the rocks to be rocks, but I don't want them to stand out too much or clutter my view. So there's one. There's two. Here's three. Maybe add in a little bit more there. And let's just grab something that's dark, but not nearly that dark, because we want it to be facing away from the sun. We can come back in here and put in light later on the edges. If you really need to right now, just as a very quick trick, if you need to do it, come in here and can shift click on one side of this up near the top and then shift click over here. So on and so forth, just following the shape. And you can probably barely see it, but I'm just bringing in some amount of highlight over here. And I don't want to, again, get us too deep into this. So I'll just leave that there for now. Maybe let's just make this shape look less ridiculous. So I'm going to grab all of that. There we go. Something like that's fine for right now. Just paint that in. And let's keep going. So really basic, simple rock type shapes. Now I want to add in a new layer, put this under everything, and come way out here with something like a bridge. So I'm just going to hold down Shift. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and draw across and give it a little bit of man-madeness. And I think that looks about right. So I'll go ahead and do the lasso tool. Come back into here. And let's say I want to come in and give it some handmade arches. And I'm going to increase the size of my brush and just come out here to something that's a lot lighter than what we've done so far. And then want to come way up and give it kind of a misty bottom so that we can see how far down it's going into the depths. And I think that looks pretty good. If I wanted to, I could also come in here and just do a darker version of that behind itself. So if I want, I can just duplicate the layer. So if I want to, I can duplicate the layer through hitting Control J, drag it down just a little bit. And then I can do a few different things. I think what I'm going to do is just a brightness and contrast adjustment, pull the brightness down a little bit more than that, and call that there we go. And we'll do a clipping mask there and just put those both into one folder. Works for me. And now I'm just going to move that over a little bit so that it gives the illusion of depth and a bit of 3D. Nothing too fancy. And then I just want to draw in between those two things and give it something that is a reasonable color. So let's just do that and call it good right here. And we'll go right in between the two. There we go. So that way it's behind the front layer, but it's in front of the back layer. Gonna deselect, and now it kind of looks like this thing dips down and then comes up at the end. And it needs to come up at the end because we need our level way out there. So I'm gonna pull this down underneath everything we got. All right, so then what we're going to do next is add in a new layer, and we're going to come out and draw our island, just something very simple. So let's grab the lasso tool, and because we're drawing under the bridge, we don't really need to worry about how this works. I don't really like how far over that goes, so maybe I'll take some of that out and I'll add back in some of this. I like that. I think that'll be solid. So what I want to do is make this kind of a darker sheer rock, but I don't want to go darker than the values we had up close to the camera. I'm going to make it something too dark. It is going to be facing away from the light source though, so maybe a little bit higher up. There we go. I'm happy with that. I think that's going to work quite well. And then we're going to want some mist or fog underneath that. So that works. And then up here on top, we probably want to grab the lasso tool and do a deselect and make this kind of a winding path up here. And we'll just go a little bit lighter with this. And lastly, we'll draw some sort of castle that goes way up into the sky. And I'll get into how the turrets and all of that would look later. But let's at least get that drawn in first. Can maybe do a couple small indications of where we're going to be here. Here we go. Something like that works for the time being. And then what I also want to do is come over here, deselect, paint in this ground, just so there's nothing awkward sitting right there. And we're going to paint in a very clear flag on top of everything. So this is going to indicate exactly where I'm meant to go. And I'm going to come in with the brush tool. Let's do something that's almost white. And I want to drag this up above. And let's make this a hard brush. So I'm going to turn the hardness all the way up. And then let's just come down and make this truly tiny. And let's do something kind of wild, like a and I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm coming out. I see that I'm meant to go left. We could add in so much more detail here if we wanted to really render this out. But just as a basic castle, I'm pretty happy with this. I am going to just come back in here and just make this a little bit less strange. There we go. And I'm pleased with that. So let me just come in and add in the opening for this turret here. And then we'll assume that everything else of note is up above the camera here. Pretty happy with that. Could come in and add in a lot more jaggedy stuff happening, but I think we'll just leave that where it's at. So now what I want to do to contextualize this, if I'm going to take it into Unity, I really want to see how I'm going to build the level out. I'm just going to put everything into a folder. I want to come over to the crop tool. And I'll undo that. And I should be able to do like a 16 by 9. Let's say I want to do a 20 by 9. And I can pull this up so that it still gets all of that. And I'll pull all of this group over. And let's say I wanted to grab just a grid or something. So there are ways to make grids inside of Photoshop, but for the speed, I'm just going to grab this grid over here, pull it down, and just do something like this. And now I can come over top of this after merging these together. And I'm just going to paint very, very basically. So let's grab a black brush. And more or less what I want to show here is that we have our opening. So this is again from a top down. So let's assume that we go off the map there. Player area that they're going to be walking is going to be here. Moving left, coming over here to this bridge. And all of this is going to have kind of a rocky face over this way. This is all going to be water. And this is going to come up and meet. Let's do this in black as well. This large island where the player can now walk up, and technically they could do any of this stuff, but the ideal path is that they're going to come up here and they're going to end up at the end. So I'm going to say F, S for finish and start. And here's the castle here. With the red flags, just so that we indicate that those are right there. And now I can at least look from the top down and see from a proportion how this all should look in my mind. And to be honest, this castle is going to drive me crazy, so I'm just going to make a new layer and very quickly rough in some shading on the turrets over here. This side being away from the light will be pretty dark, theoretically. And if I were taking my time, I would be painting on a layer under these flags, but here we are. So there's some shadows being cast from over here. And if we wanted, we could come in and do some and maybe just add in an actual 3D shape there. All right, and we could spend a lot more time on that, but we're just going to call it good there. You can get that that's a castle. There's some flags out here. All good to go. All right, and just a couple last minute touches here so the castle blends in a bit more, is that we are going to want to add in some shadow and maybe some bushes, just because I don't want to blend between the castle and the ground. bushes, trees, something like that. So I'm just going to pull this down a little bit, pull the hardness all the way to 0, pull the size up, and now I can come in here and just paint in some shadow. Something like that I'm pretty happy about. Cool. And then the bushes to go in there. Let's see what other brushes we can use inside of the default pack real quick. I like that. And just to be a little over the top about it, do some golden leaf or something around the edges. And just doing something to make it kind of interesting. Last thing I probably ought to do is just a little bit of gray over the top of this that I will fade down and do a minimal hardness brush just to pull those flags down a little bit. There we go. Okay, that's looking pretty interesting. I'm going to go into the brush layer because we can always... we probably should have stopped a while ago, but here we are. And I'm going back into the brush that we used for the brushes. And I'm just going to lighten it up a little bit. And then some highlights. Pretty decent. I'm happy with that. And I think let's finally call this good. All right, last thing I promise. I just want to come back in here and straighten up a little bit of this. It is just slightly unsightly. Not bad. And then just come in here a little bit darker. And just going to draw some of these lines a bit more straight so it doesn't look as wild. There we go. Something like that I am a bit happier with. And maybe let's just come up here and make this entrance a little bit bigger and break my own rule and make it dark and cavernous. You know what? Let's make it a little bit light. Draw the eye some more. Okay. I think finally I'm going to say I'm happy with this. We're calling it good. And I'll stop iterating. I promise. And next video, we're going to essentially rebuild all of this in 3D using ProBuilder in Unity 6. So please don't miss it. Thanks for checking this out. I hope you all have a great day. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.